Hello, welcome to this webinar, which is part of the RSA Professional Development webinar series. My name is Dimitri Corpakis. I'm a former European Commission official and engineer and planner by training. I'm delighted to chair today's webinar. This webinar series offers regular training and support for skills, knowledge, and professional development on a variety of topics. Now, before we begin, I would like to say a few words about the RSA. The RSA is a global and interdisciplinary network for urban and regional groups, development, and policy. The RSA supports its members with latest research funding schemes, networking and publishing communities, and spaces to grow research and careers. Now, some housekeeping for our webinar. Please note that this webinar will be recorded and will be made available on the RSA Lounge. I would like you to put any questions in the Q&A box, not the chat, and I will manage to read them out during the session. Finally, please use the hashtag RSA webinar to tweet about the event. And now, two words about today's discussion. The ability to write for and engage with policymaker audiences has become an important skill for researchers to acquire and develop. This partly reflects increasing demands from external funding bodies for new research that has real societal impact and which may only be facilitated through changes in policy and/or new policy design. In addition, universities are increasingly being tasked to focus upon their civic activities, with academics being encouraged to liaise closely with regional stakeholders and policymakers on issues and challenges of local regional concern, the so-called third mission. Yet, explaining complex issues to policymakers often poses new questions for researchers, especially those long-versed in academic writing. So it's not an easy task. This afternoon, we have two great speakers, Dr. Mariachiara Barzotto and Professor Phil Tomlinson, both from the School of Management, University of Bath, and they draw upon their own experiences and expertise and offer some useful tips and guidance in engaging with and writing for policymaker audiences. Our first speaker, Mariachiara Barzotto, is an associate professor in international management at the University of Bath, UK. Prior to this, Mariachiara worked as an assistant professor at Newcastle University Business School and Essex Business School, UK. Her research focuses on skills labor markets, technological changes, new working spaces, and regional development. Her research has been published in international journals and also in policymakers and practitioner outlets. Her work has been cited by the Asian Development Bank and Publications Office of the European Union. She held a Marie Sklodowska-Curie Individual Fellowship under the EU Horizon 2020 program and funding from Regional Studies Association Policy Expo, as well as the British Academy Leverhulme. She is currently leading the policy working group within EU Cost Action on the geography of new working spaces and the impact of the periphery, and is co-investigator on EPSRC Made Smarter Innovation, Center for People Digitalization. She is a member of the Scientific Committee of Regional Studies and Local Development Journal and the Expert Stakeholder Group on Future Technologies and Skill Within Pillars, Pathways to Inclusive Labor Markets of the EU Horizon 2020 Framework Program. Next, we will have Phil Tomlinson, who is a professor of industrial strategy and co-director of the Center for Governance, Regulation, and Industrial Strategy in the School of Management at the University of Bath, UK. He is a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences, and he is also the Policy Debates editor at Regional Studies, and he was formerly the RSA's Policy Expo series editor. Phil's research explores the interplay between economic governance, innovation, regional development, and place-based industrial strategy. He has published widely and extensively in this area, in leading academic journals and also in policy and practitioner-facing outlets, including industry reports, policy briefs, and the media. Phil has held several external appointments at local, regional, national, and international levels, including with UK parliamentary bodies, and he has also chaired, organized, and spoken at events at the European Commission. So I'm convinced now that you know that we have two brilliant speakers. So we will start with Mariachiara. So Mariachiara, you have the floor.
So thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. So please let me start by thanking Dimitri and thanking the Regional Study Association for having me as today and for all the support to our research as well as our engagement with the policymakers, as we will explain more in details in this presentation. It's a real pleasure sharing with the Regional Study Association colleagues our experience in writing for a policy audience. Today, we would like to walk you through our training as well as our experience in engaging with and writing for a policy audience that we developed over the years. We would like to begin by highlighting the reasons why we believe that it is critical for today's academics to engage with policymakers and write targeting this audience. First, there is an increasing demand for external fundings bodies for new research that has a real impact on society, and such an impact may be only fostered through policy changes. Second, universities are increasingly being tasked with focusing on the civic activities. So in particular, academics are being encouraged to liaise closely with the regional stakeholders and policymakers on issues that are of local concern. And third, we think that it is important to highlight that liaising with the policymakers and developing links with this network can enhance your career as academics, conferring on you visibilities of your work, and as a result of this, you might be asked to be part of an advisory panel, increasing the prestige of your profile. So we are aware that devoting time to policy engagement may add new challenges for researchers. One of these challenges can be the increase of workload pressures. However, we believe that it can be intellectually rewarding. Indeed, amongst other, policy engagement might offer you opportunities to publicly showcase your own research and reach a wider audience. It can give you the possibility to expose your research to a wider public discourse, and this can lead to the chance of being involved in shaping future policies, enhancing the impact of your research outside the academic boundaries. So there are several types of form of engagement and policy-oriented output. Here we have highlighted some of those. There are research outputs that can be shared via social media, targeting a wider audience. So for instance, Twitter, LinkedIn represents helpful media in which to engage. Researchers are increasingly using those platforms to offer short explanation with the policy implication of their research articles. So these strategies seem to give scholars a broader exposure, which goes beyond the academic network. You can use social media like LinkedIn, for instance, to share a short summary of your latest research. So a common self-promotion strategy is to create posts in which you put into spotlights your hot off the press scientific article. The technique that we recommend is to provide the link to your technical, kind of more jargonistic article and choose the hashtags in your social media post very carefully, as they are key in giving you visibility. Indeed, we think that the right hashtag may enable you to gain the attention of media and policymakers. And last but not least, this strategy can enhance your autometric or plan scores. These are metrics capturing your online footprint, They provide insights into the ways people interact with individual pieces of research output. For instance, articles, conference proceeding, book chapter, and many more in the online environment. So we would suggest to tag your co-authors, your research groups, outlet where you publish your work, grant founders, and your own institutions. This will tap you into their network, and maybe these networks will repost your piece, and this in turn will increase the outreach of your work. So writing blogs and media articles represent an effective strategy to gain a wider exposure of your work. And when writing your piece on, for instance, political issues or on your research articles, your projects, always try to produce a commentary using a language, but also a structure that a lay person would appreciate. So another option you might wish to think about is to draft policy briefs or reports. Those might consist of a summary of a policy implications of a research or scientific article of yours or a research project of yours. It might also be the case that you have been commissioned to write a piece on a specific topic, so for instance by the local government, or highlight specific policy implications targeting a policymaker's audience. Phil and I wanted also to draw your attention on other outputs, in particular the policy-facing books. As you might be aware, the Regional Study Associations have developed its own series, the RSA Expose book, which has been very successful and I will say instrumental in enhancing the profile of many academics, myself and Phil included, within the policymakers world. These books, as Phil will explain in the second part of today's presentation, are policy-oriented research, which provide the readers beyond academia with a generic and or specific policy recommendation. So kind of up to now, we have a look at the range of outputs you can develop to reach policymakers. But in order to draft these pieces, the first step is to identify and target your policy audience. So to do so in an effective way, you will need to establish the actors involved in the political process and build a deep understanding of their agenda. So you might want to do so by following online debates within the national European Parliament or equivalent bodies, and also to follow politicians' social media accounts. So it is crucial that you have a clear grasp of a political process and at which stage of a political process your audience is, as you will need to promote your work at the right time within the political debate. So you need to explain why your research is important to policymakers, why they should care, and what are their incentives. So for instance, you should ask yourself whether you can connect your research to issues in the region or in the constituency that target your policymakers, or the policymakers that is representing a particular type of constituency, or whether your research deals with a topic they have spoken public about, or whether it raises critical issues that are matter of current government policy or concern. For example, in the UK, the levelling up agenda. So our suggestion is not only to follow politicians, but also civil servants or specially employed policy advisors. They might work at different levels of government, can be regional, national, or beyond national, and they have a different level of expertise, experiences, and more importantly, time horizons. So politicians, as we are all very well aware, have an eye on elections, and the stage of electoral cycle in which politicians find themselves may affect the impact of your research message. So the effect is most likely when politicians have a clear mandate and wish to leave a legacy, On the other hand, civil servants are usually imposed for a longer term and directly deal with policy implication. So given their task, civil servants might be more likely to value your contribution as a critical friend. So once you have defined your target audience, what are the strategies that you can use to build a relationship with your target policymakers? So you might want to use a direct approach, for instance, a direct email, or you can tag them in your tweets. When you do so, please, as we will explain in more details later on, do limit the use of jargon and try to focus on conveying the importance of your research within the policy debate. So we are aware that establishing access with your target audience might be difficult, especially for early careers researchers. So in this regard, we would like to remind you that the regional study associations are excellent in opening doors and connecting researchers with policymakers through its conferences, but also networks and other links. Personally, Phil and I are extremely grateful to all the support that the RSA gave us, both for establishing these contacts, but also for providing us with the platform to disseminate the results of our work. So in a way, to a certain extent, we can say that academics and policymakers are two different species. Academics, as you might be very well aware, have been developing a specialist expertise on a given topic through their studies. So research and academic writing are often very long processes. Researchers devote much time emphasizing the scientific technicalities, the methodological rigors implemented in their research, which undergoes through a delicate peer reviewing process. Academics explain the results in a lengthy manner, reading them in light of an outstanding scientific basis and using jargon which is common for the colleagues contributing to the same scientific debates. So in the limitation sections, but not only in this section of a scientific manuscript, academics make explicit the empirical and the theoretical caveats of their work in order to define the boundaries of their arguments and their claim. On the other hand, politicians do not have too much time to devote to a specific matter. The time horizons for policymakers are really different. So policymakers are busy actors. Usually they would require quick explanations behind a phenomena and possible solutions to a problem, because they might be the end receivers of conflicting views on a particular topic. So they often receive conflicting sources of information, and which can be challenging to disentangle, especially as they are unlikely to have specialist subject knowledge. So they will need to gather evidence in order to make their decisions. Policymakers do not want to be bombarded with academic jargon, overly complex argument, and long methodological explanation. So they want to receive research policy documents written with a clear message, which is fascinating to read, but is also backed up with reliable evidence and sources, with concise description and timely policy relevance. So researchers should also be aware of all these differences in writing for policymakers' audience and adapt their writing accordingly. It would help if academics essentially became bilingual, speaking both the language of science and policy. And in order to do so, the researchers should aim to present clear messages with a purpose, summarizing the research, the main results, implication, limitation in a coherent and in a consistent way. So as an academic, be clear on the uncertainties of their research state of art, and be aware that uncertainties are not welcomed in the policymaker world, as they will make the decision-making process much more challenging. Academics should also show the critical evidence from their studies and offer a course of action or a set of recommendations, as Phil will highlight later in the presentation. Do not include the details on the methodology you used, since, as I mentioned before, policymakers require quick explanation and possible solution to a problem. Information should be presented in short sentences or short paragraphs and in an easy-to-read style, which remain professionals in the presentation, but avoid technical jargon. It should bring out the critical policy points, or what we call the policy takeaways. Again, Phil will give you some example in the second part of his presentation. And for kind of more comprehensive policy reports, you should look to include an executive summary, for instance, or a key recommendation sections. You cannot avoid, in case, for instance, you cannot avoid including some technical jargon, you should provide the definitions, or especially for policy-facing books, a glossary of key terms. Include the details of your search that readers can have the opportunity to follow up on your study. And the policymakers would prefer open source documents, as it will be easier for them to consult those resources, since they most likely won't have access to circulation of scientific outlets. So we would recommend to make your document also visually engaging. You might want to use infographics, insert boxes, highlighted text, graphs, diagrams, or even photographs, so long as you have permission to reuse and publish them. Also, researchers that claim something unexpected or frame their argument around an exciting and compelling real-world story are more likely to attract attention and generate impact. So we would suggest to think about if and how to reframe your research on those unexpected and compelling stories. Finally, we believe that it is of great help to consult similar and recent published output in order to kind of more deeply understand the structure of your policy-oriented document. While drafting your policy document, you should also ask yourself whether a policymaker will understand or follow your arguments. So we believe that it might be a good strategy to share a draft of your work or even a chapter with your colleagues, your network of policymakers, practitioners, to obtain their feedback. For policy-facing books, seek out forewords from respective policymakers or practitioners and a cover endorsement. This will add credibility to your message. Phil will give you an example later. And moreover, we would like to highlight that Learning Society, for instance, the Regional Study Association, can help you here. In our case, the Regional Study Association has been of great support in disseminating our research. And finally, once all the research and the writing has been completed, we kind of would recommend, as we mentioned at the very beginning of our talk, to promote your work via social media platforms and blogs. You may want to contact the policymaker directly, email the policymaker directly, or you might want to arrange a public launch of a policy report or policy-facing book, as Phil will illustrate in the second part of today's webinar. And finally, work closely with a learning society on promotion would really be of help. We, as a researcher, are evidence providers. So in order to provide evidence in an effective format to policymakers and achieve policy impact, academics should develop a distinct set of competencies, which are not really commonly provided in the formal university education. The Joint Research Center, the GRC, has mapped these competencies in the Science for Policy Competence Framework. It consists of 27 competencies that are divided into 5 clusters, and these clusters are understanding policy, participating in policy making, communication, engaging with the citizens and stakeholders, and finally, collaborate. So as the GRC highlighted, these competencies are essential to enhance the impact of scientific knowledge for better policies. And be able to use these competencies can support researchers, but also research organizations more broadly, by making sure that the most useful and robust facts are provided, understood, and considered in the appropriate time within the policy cycle. So the framework provides a detailed description of each competence for attitude, skills, and knowledge, understanding, and guides a researcher through a learning path of 4 different levels of progression for each competence. So you start from the foundation level through the intermediate, advanced, and expert one. And here I provide you with an example of a cluster called understanding policy, and the first competence within this cluster, evidence needs. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go through the details, but you have the reference here at the end of the slides. And I would like to also draw your attention on an online self-reflection tool that the GRC has developed. Its purpose is to help a researcher working in science for policy to reflect on their own level of competencies for the 5 clusters that I mentioned before. So this tool is really useful to reflect on where your strengths are and on which area you should work to improve. Based on the results you will obtain, you can make a decision about your personal learning, but also identify a possible development plans for yourself. So for instance, you can decide that you want to be a generalist. So you want to somehow be good at everything. Or instead, you could decide that you would like to be a specialist, aiming to be excellent at one or a few connected areas of competencies. So to access this tool, you will need to create a European Union login account, but you can use this tool for free. And now I will leave the floor to Phil, who kindly will talk us through one of our experiences in engaging and writing for policymakers, thanks to the RSA support.
Thank you, Mari. So the example I want to go through is our experience with the Regional Studies Association Policy Exco scheme between 2017 and 2019. So the Policy Expo grant scheme was launched in 2017, and it is a policy research initiative worth £15,000 to successful teams that aim to connect their work and wider communities to societal questions and policy needs. So expos typically involve a team of 5 researchers, which must include 1 early career researcher and 1 researcher based in another country. Expos run for no more than 18 months from being awarded to the submission of the key outputs. So it's a relatively short policy-facing book that is required, and a short article for regional studies, regional science, which is obviously subjected to peer review. Essentially, the aim of a Policy Expo is to investigate how the communities of regional studies and regional science and urban studies and related fields in economic geography and so on can respond and advise policy on new societal challenges and opportunities. So we were the first team to be awarded the RSA Policy Expo, and our team included Mari, who at the time was our early career researcher, Felicia Fay, also from the School of Management at Bath, Carlo Corradini, who at the time was at Aston, is now at Henley Business School, and Sandrine Labori, who is based at the University of Ferrara, and myself. Because we were the first team, we were tasked with designing a template for the policy-facing book and ensuring that it would be accessible to non-academics, in particular policymakers and practitioners. This was a trip, or a bit of a trip into the unknown for us, and also for the Regional Studies Association, because no one really knew how to do it. But the Regional Studies Association gave us a good, clear steer and a couple of examples of policy reports by other social scientists to give us some examples of how we might go about putting together this policy facing book. But even so, the process itself was very experimental, and it is fair to say it kind of evolved with quite a lot of input from ourselves as the team, but also external advisors through the RSA and policymakers themselves. Our particular project looked at smart specialization policy and Industry 4.0 and the implications of these for lagging regions. Some of you who are in the Regional Studies Association will have received our Expo book as part of your RSA membership package 2 or 3 years ago. So this slide here pretty much summarizes the context of our project. So if you've been involved in the Regional Studies Association and or European regional policy circles over the last decade or so, these issues about smart specialization are probably quite familiar to you. But in summary, over the last decade, the last 10 years or so, smart specialization has formed the backbone of the European Union's place-based innovation policy. And essentially it seeks to support innovation type projects and opportunities with the potential for knowledge spillovers, further innovation and market growth. And of course, we're now in an age of the new disruptive technologies associated with Industry 4.0, such as artificial intelligence, digital and robotics. And there's all sorts of issues surrounding those, how they may play out at a national level and also at a regional level too. So the challenge that we saw was that smart specialization policy in itself can inherently favor more dynamic regions, because those regions which have strong business and social networks and strong capabilities in terms of a professional class and a skilled workforce and entrepreneurial capabilities, in those types of regions, more exciting and innovative possibilities are more likely to emerge. And hence there are probably a greater opportunity for good candidates for projects to emerge that can be suitable candidates for policy support. In contrast, lagging regions which don't have those sorts of characteristics and you know, don't have the strength of those capabilities that more dynamic regions have, they are at a distinct disadvantage. They often have hollowed out manufacturing bases and low knowledge and skills bases. And as a consequence, these regions are less likely to identify new innovation opportunities and are hence less likely to benefit from smart specialization policy. And as many of you may be aware, this is a classic example of the so-called Matthew principle at work. And if you've read your Bible, you know the Matthew principle. It's about it as a line in the book of Matthew which says, "For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance, but from him who has not, even what he has will be taken away." And I think that's in Matthew 25 verse 29. So this is a Matthew principle at work. So weaker regions are less likely to be favored by smart specialization policy or benefit from smart specialization policy. So our research and policy question can be summarized as follows. How might smart specialization policy, as epitomized by what was known as RIS3, Research and Innovation Strategies for Smart Specialization, being utilized to turn the perceived potential smart specialization in Industry 4.0 into a reality for lagging regions? How could lagging regions benefit from this policy instrument? So in terms of our project, and specifically for the book, we decided to bring together a wide set of experts from regional studies and from the policy arena that could offer different but complementary policy perspectives on this research and policy question. This was our particular choice. We could have authored the book solely ourselves, and later Policy Expo books in the series have done so on different issues, or we could just include chapters from academics and policymakers, which is what we did. We chose that option. And of course, as a team, we did, of course, write 2 chapters in the book itself. The book is a relatively short. These expos are designed to be short and punchy. They're around 30,000 words. There's a limit on that. But as Maury emphasized, it's therefore important that it's written in a policy-facing format that avoids as much as possible academic jargon. And we did found that to be a challenge because in our book, we had chapters from some truly world-leading economic geographers and regional studies scholars, which is fantastic. They were bringing their perspective into the policy domain in our book on smart specialization and lagging regions. But what tended to happen when they submitted the chapters, they generally wrote in their traditional academic format. And we used an academic jargon, which is not really suitable for a policy audience. Now, we didn't think it was fair to send the chapters back to the authors and say, thank you, but could you please modify your language, change your language a little bit, for policymakers. We were really grateful they were contributing. So as a team, the 5 of us, we carefully edited each chapter, redrafted sentences and paragraphs so that the chapters suited the book style. We felt that was our responsibility as editors of the book, and it is obviously going out under our name as editors as well. And in the book, as Mari emphasized in her part of the presentation, we included plenty of infographics, box case studies, visuals, and it critically sought to identify and highlight the policy challenges and solutions. We also included an executive summary, and through the Regional Studies Association, we sourced forwards and endorsements from prominent policymakers and academics. And this gave the book additional credibility, gave it credibility in the academic community, but also gave it credibility in the policymaking community as well. We did try to avoid jargon as much as possible, but sometimes there was no getting away from using technical terms. So we deliberately introduced and included a glossary, or in some places explain the boxes to outline some of the core concepts. Finally, each chapter had its own color code, which was quite nice and seemed to work quite well. And you can get an example from the slide here of the format of the book and the contents in our particular book. And here is another example of the format and the writing style with some of the explainer boxes here on the right. We had to explain what Horizon Europe was and what European territorial cooperation was in this particular chapter. And we thought that was very helpful for readers so they can get a grasp of what things were in the main narrative. And here we have some case studies. Each chapter had a case study in there. Again, we boxed those, and each chapter ended by identifying the key challenges and offered some potential policy recommendations. And this is the policy recommendations for this particular chapter, which I think was chapter 5. And for those interested, these were our key policy takeaways from the project, which were given prominence in the executive summary, and were also the focus of our more technical regional studies, regional science paper. I'm not going to go into them now. I'm sure you've had the book, and you can access the journal article online if you want to read more details. But our project was more than just a policy-facing book and journal article. It was a bit of a journey for us. And with the help of the Regional Studies Association, we positively engaged with policymakers throughout the whole process. They were a key input into the shape of the book and the journal article, and helped to shape our thoughts on how we were going to present this final set of outputs. One of these was the European Week of Regions and Cities, where in October 2018, we were invited to host a 4-hour session. Now, the European Week of Regions and Cities is an annual event held in Brussels celebrating European regions and cities, and it brings together national, regional and local policymakers, business leaders, trade unionists and academic experts from across Europe to deliberate and explore ways in which European regions can deliver sustainable and inclusive growth. And because we'd had a policy expo and because we worked closely with the Regional Studies Association, the Regional Studies Association helped us to secure this 4-hour slot at at the European Week of Regions and Cities. And it gave us an excellent opportunity to present and discuss and showcase our research on lagging regions, on smart specialisation and Industry 4.0 with these leading regional policy experts from business, policy and academia. In doing so, we were quite innovative as well. The European Union were quite keen that, you know, we actually held a session which engaged participants and tried to tailor our presentation to the participants' particular interests. So in this regard, we issued a pre-session survey to registered attendees, and this enabled us to get a feel of what the audience was going to be like and what the sort of issues they would like to see raising in the speaker presentations. And so in the session itself, we built in some of the survey results in our presentations, but we also experimented with the interactive technologies that were becoming available to facilitate real-time audience participation, generating real-time polls and word clouds, for example, that helped to facilitate wider discussion in the room. And the room itself was quite busy. We had a big audience there. There was around about 50 to 60 people in the audience from as I say, from all these various national and regional and local bodies from across Europe. And on the slide, there are some examples of the sorts of data we sort of presented. The book itself was finally finished in 2019, and we officially launched it at the European Union's Joint Research Centre in Seville on the 26th of September 2019. Again, we had a great audience of regional policymakers, European Union officials, and some academics, including some who actually contributed to our book. And of course, at the time, we did benefit from the JRC, the Joint Research Centre, hosting a conference at the same time. So that's helped us to boost the audience. And here are some photos of the event, of the book launch. Myself and Sandrine Labori took responsibility for launching the book in Seville. And we were joined by Sally Hardy, Chief Executive of the Regional Studies Association. In terms of our outputs from the whole process, well, we delivered the book, and we also delivered 2 academic articles for the funding. So one paper for Regional Studies, Regional Science. We also had another paper published in Cambridge Journal of Regions, Economy and Society. Wider benefits we got from the process is that we enhanced our reputation for research with policy impact, and we gained valuable experience and confidence of liaising and engaging with policymakers, in this case, at a very high level. And moreover, following our book launch, the European Union's Joint Research Centre instigated a new project looking at smart specialisation in lagging regions, and cited our work as being a factor behind this new project that they were starting to undertake. Also, for us as a team, well, we continue to work together on research, especially on projects that have strong regional implications, and we have subsequently had further grant success and publications. Finally, this slide highlights some further resources in terms of help with writing for policymakers and engaging with policymakers. Most of these are at a European Union level, but they're useful for researchers anywhere, really. Cost Connect is a series of thematic workshops organised by the EU's Cost Association, which provide an open space for researchers, policymakers, and research and innovation scholars and stakeholders to network and grow their ideas. It brings together a broad set of actors from the European research area and beyond, with the aim of stimulating and strengthening multi-stakeholder partnerships and networks. Cost action participants benefit from communication with policymakers and an opportunity to learn about the latest policy developments in the European research and innovation landscape. The Science of Policy Handbook also provides advice on how to bring science to the attention of policymakers, and it presents lessons learned along the way. And it's applicable in the European context, but also in a global context as well. So it's applicable beyond the EU. And of course, the Joint Research Centre is the European Commission's Science and Knowledge Service with a mission to bring science and knowledge into European Union policy making. Okay, I think I'm done. Thanks for listening, and I'm now open for any questions.
Thanks, Mariachiara and Phil, for a great presentation. I think you gave very well the problematic around the link between academics and policymakers. I've experienced this myself during my time in the Commission. It's not always easy, and I very much acknowledge the type of work you have done was very useful with the Policy Expo. I think this is something that we really need, but I understand it's not always easy to accomplish because of these differences we have seen that you have also highlighted. If I'm not mistaken, we have not yet any questions in the Q&A box. I encourage everybody, our participants, to bring in their questions. In between, I have some questions for you. First of all, I understand very much your point of view for engaging and writing for policymakers, which is a very complex operation. But on top of that, I understand it requires to allocate time on top of your different tasks. So a kind of third mission as an academic. So how do you manage? Is there any tip on how to manage this activity in a more effective way? I don't know who wants to come first. Maybe Mariachiara?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer this question. So thanks for the question. It actually gave us the opportunity to share some more tips. In a sense of what, like as academics, you need to kind of put a lot of ads on. You have like your lecture job, but also your researcher job, and like engaging with the policymaker can be on top. And as you mentioned, and we kind of highlighted in the presentation, we have a lot of different work pressure. So I think one tip and something that myself, but also with the Phil and the team that Phil mentioned for the Expo book, working with the colleagues in a team will be really of help, because in a way, like for instance, we share resources. So like for instance, new papers, articles, some kind of up-to-date documents. So when we see something, we put it like in our chat. So we make also the team aware of different or new articles and new documents, and we kind of working team, we help each other in the writing up stage as well. So another kind of a suggestion, in addition to the one that we mentioned in the slides, will be kind of really working with colleagues and team and sharing resources, collaborating in the writing up stages as well.
Phil, do you want to add something?
Just that, really. I think increasingly universities are expecting their academics to engage in the third mission and to have impact with their research. And also, it's often part of if you receive in receipt of a grant recipient, you have to show impact, and working with policymakers and coming up with new ideas or suggestions to help to shape policy is one way in which you can have impact. So it's kind of almost become part of the job in a sense. Maury is very right and is correct in saying working in a team makes that a lot easier, because you can draw on different experiences and throw ideas around with each other to get a good feel for what might work and what might not. But yeah, it is part of the job, but it actually makes the job more exciting in many ways and more real, rather than just doing the research in the office or in the laboratory or whatever it is, and getting out the results, but actually saying, well, this has got a real implication to change people's life. This makes, there's something really important here. I need to get it out there. So it is pretty much part of the remit. I think we're quite fortunate at Bath, and that is increasingly recognized. It's recognized as part of our workload as well, to have this sort of external engagement, this part of the civic mission that we're engaged with. So there is a bit of time allocated to that. But it is kind of these days expected. Universities encourage it. They provide training. We benefit from webinars like this, I guess, but also they provide media training if you need to get out to to get some of these ideas out into the media as well, and they do provide support. You need to engage with policymakers and other outlets.
I just had a question that went into the chat, and I think it's an interesting question. It came from Yinzi. He or she says, "Thank you very much for the great presentation. Can you give us some suggestions about how to better explain the results of qualitative research to policymakers? Compared to quantitative research, it is more difficult to visualize and summarize qualitative research in a concise way." So how we go about explaining qualitative research to policymakers, because of course people want to see most of the time data visualizations. How can we do it better?
I think, if I could take that, I think stories matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even if you're doing quantitative research, actually, sometimes that can be very dry. If you can offer policymakers stories and highlight those stories, they can connect with those stories. It's a building narratives and stories which can connect with policymakers to give them a feel for what this research is about and where it has its impact.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And obviously in presentations, I mean, in our book we didn't. I don't think we really reported any quantitative results as such. We did highlight case studies of where things went right and where they didn't go so well. So I think highlighting case studies within particular narratives in boxes in particular documents can be very useful as well. So it's essentially stories and highlighting cases.
Right.
I don't know if Maury has anything to add.
Mm-hmm.
No, absolutely. These are the two key points. First is about kind of creating a compelling story, a narrative, and if you have something which is kind of unexpected in your results, highlight those unexpected part, and both using words, so using the narrative, but also if you can put your results in kind of a summary, or maybe using some diagram, some sort of graphical aids will actually be very helpful, and it will be much more straightforward to get your point up to the policymaker. That's what I will say.
Great. I have another question. People have started to put more questions. So Emily asks, how did you finish your policy report first before reframing them into academic articles, perhaps with theorization, etc.? So how you go from the policy report that somehow was a little bit less complex to an academic article. This is probably not just a question of process, but how do the policy research process and output benefit the academic output, or vice versa? So what is the interplay between the two levels?
I think we're always guided, when we conduct a research project, we're always guided with what's in the academic literature. I think we're particularly interested, and possibly the reason why we're in regional studies and we're in the business school, we're particularly interested in applied research, so that our research has implications for the real world. But fundamentally, we were always guided with the academic concepts and what's there in theory. So that guides our research and our research process. And then when we get some results, we want to get those results out quickly. We do have to decode it. We have to kind of put it in a jargon or a language that policymakers understand. I mean, clearly, we want to, if it's valid work, it's been subject to some peer review, informal peer review. We got some results out, and we might want to share those results earlier than they come out through an academic journal publication. Then we could release those. We'll do it in a way, or those insights, we'll do it in a way in which policymakers can understand. Okay, and then we have to, getting it into a journal article, which can take longer because peer review process, particularly in social science and management, can be be quite lengthy, because it has to go through peer review and then revised and resubmitted and so on. We're kind of almost guided by reviewers and editors, and we have to revert to the academic language. But fundamentally, we're always guided by what we know in the academic literature, and we try and if we've got some results, preliminary results or final results to be presented at conferences, we think we want to get this to policymaker audiences because it's important, we would put it in a language which we feel is suitable for them.
Right. Maybe another question from me. You gave us a very good description of how you have been involved in the expo scheme of the RSA. Can you give us some examples of how this helped you in broadening your policy engagement activity in some ways?
Yeah, I think certainly from my perspective, and I think from Maury as well, before we began the expo, we had already had experience of working with policymakers at local and national levels, but from my perspective, not had the experience with a supranational body like the EU. So that was new experience. Obviously enhanced because we did a good job in the end. I think that was recognised. It gave us further confidence that we could engage at that level and have something useful to say. It also enhanced our reputation as well, externally outside our universities, but also internally at our host institution, because all of a sudden with people thinking you've worked at the EU level, you're the people who deal with policy. You could, regional policy, that's becoming increasingly important, certainly in the UK context, the UK policy agenda. Maybe you're the people in the university to, we need to approach. And I think just serendipitously, other opportunities arose at the same time. So I got involved with more closely with UK parliamentary bodies, the Manufacturing Commission of the Parliamentary Manufacturing Commission, for example, and then myself, my colleague Felicia Fay, who is also on the expo. We got invited onto the local industrial strategy review panel for a local enterprise partnership. So certainly it helped us, in terms of getting more experience, built our confidence and reputation. And I think things just sort of mushroom from there. Once you get involved in one project, one set of liaisons, others seem to emerge. I don't know if Maria has anything to add to that.
No, absolutely. I mean, the result to what Phil just the process that Phil just described is also kind of, you can see how your network, both in academia, but also outside academia and policymaker in particular, are kind of growing, and you get involved or get kind of exposed to all these different debates, and from there kind of new ideas can emerge, or maybe like a new kind of policy recommendation. So it's a nice kind of way to expand your network and get more exposed to what's there and how you can contribute. And this is something that Phil mentioned, and is actually, I find it very true, is really about, like, you can see that your work can make a difference. And I think this is actually quite rewarding, I will say.
Great. Looking at my watch, I realize that our time is probably up. We could spend, of course, hours talking on the subject, but we should conclude somehow here. You will agree with me that this is a difficult and sensitive issue. Policymakers have indeed great expectations from academics. I can witness this myself, and they do not always get what they might expect all the time. More than a communication issue is a question of mutual understanding and proper positioning, evaluation of options, and scenario building. I would like to thank our speakers, the RSA staff who prepared this webinar, particularly Alex Holmes and Nikki Peeling, and of course, all of you who took the time to watch this webinar with us. We will be taking a break for the summer, we will be back in the autumn and have some great sessions being planned. So please keep an eye on our website for more details. The website also includes more information on membership, which works by both considering career stage and geography. Thanks for being with us and have a great afternoon.